Welcome everyone, Christine here with my Legendary Lord tier list for both the Warriors of Chaos and the Wood Elves. The Wood Elves and the Warriors of Chaos are difficult to rank on a regular tier list because on one hand, the races themselves are really powerful, though they are boring to play. On the other hand, the Legendary Lords are very powerful, largely because of the race, but not just that. Individually, they're also very strong, very scary to deal with on the campaign map if you're playing with them. But that doesn't mean that they're great or that their campaigns are great. So I'm going to put them in a separate tier list from all the rest, and I'm going to do it based on how well their campaigns are designed, how fun their campaigns are designed, because you can have a Legendary Lord that's extremely powerful, and he's utter crap to actually play. Now, this is something that some people can't understand, can't grasp, but this is something that does matter for a very substantial number of players. Anyway, so first off, in terms of these campaigns, Bellacor at S tier. If you're going to play a Warriors of Chaos campaign, the best campaign to play as the Warriors of Chaos, hands down, is going to be Bellacor. The reason is he's very powerful. He can confederate all the other Legendary Lords, so I think you need to own the DLC. Can't do it if you don't own the DLC, because I've seen comments from people who are unable to do it. I think that might be a DLC restriction. But either way, you do have a great deal of power with Bellacor because of the Confederation. His starting position is powerful. He gets 2 vassals on that tiny little island, so that island is defensible. He is strong in battle. He gets a demon upkeep benefit. He can upgrade demons in his campaign, so he has a lot of strength overall to play with. And on top of that, he is able to make portals around the world. He starts with 2 already made, or well, rather 3, because he has one in Albion itself, but he has one in the Ostmark and one in the Southern Castways that he can go to very quickly in his campaign, and then he can build more portals throughout the course of his campaign. He also starts with all of the demonic gifts of Chaos unlocked, so that gives him even more campaign power. Very powerful Legendary Lord, and can have a fairly fun and flexible campaign. Then we have Durfo of the Wood Elves. I think that with the Wood Elves, there's certainly some very fun campaigns to be played, but there's something special about Durfo being a walking nightmare that has Wall Breaker for his treemen and Ancient treemen. So his lords and himself, they have the Wall Breaker ability. They can smash down walls. Yeah, that is kind of hilarious when you just attack an enemy settlement with your Ancient Treeman and just break down walls. You don't need any kind of siege in this particular campaign. Actually, having that ability is pretty useful for the Wood Elves, because some Wood Elven armies or some Wood Elven Legendary Lords can actually struggle in sieges, largely because of the lack of siege options. Like, you don't have artillery as the Wood Elves. Durfo being able to bust down walls like he does, it gives him an incredible amount of power. He can also easily confederate far more easily than the others anyway, can confederate all the other Legendary Lords of the Wood Elves, granting him even more campaign power. And one of the things I've realized playing Wood Elven campaigns more and more in Warhammer 3 is actually starting near the Oak of Ages is quite important, because there's things you need to do in order to stabilize the situation around the oak regardless in every campaign. And if you're starting away from that, you're kind of distracted by other things that are happening. Now, you do want to travel around the world, but you do want to also stabilize the oak. So Durfo has a lot of campaign potential because of his faction effects, because of his confederation ability and his actual start position. Well, starting position not in the sense that starting a war with Karak Norn and having to deal with the Grey Mountains is fun. It's not, but rather just overall in the Oak. Then we have Volcan Athir as the Warriors of Chaos. Not quite as good as Bellacor, but still very powerful Legendary Lord. She's incredibly difficult to take down in battle. Being a Coronate Legendary Lord also gives her quite a few advantages in terms of sacking benefits, post-battle loot, raising settlements, and crucially, because of her starting position, she is in such a situation that she can easily confederate quite a few factions and earn a biblical amount of money, because she can confederate a lot of Dark Elven factions. The interesting thing about Dark Elves is they can earn a ridiculous sum of money in their campaigns, even the minor factions. I'm not just talking here about Malekith or Hellebrand, I'm talking here like the initial faction you start a war with, Grand, which can earn like thousands and thousands of gold. That means money, that means, that means armies, that means a lot more campaign flexibility. And the Dark Elves are actually pretty damn powerful as vassals as well. And you have a lot of them that you can vassalize next to you. Make your way down to Moravi, vassalize her as well, and then steamroll the campaign map. It is a bit awkward to get your second Dark Fortress in her campaign, to be clear, but she does have a ridiculous amount of power that she has available in her campaign. She gets movement range after battles, or rather after taking out settlements, but she's kind of like a mini Scarbrand in a campaign, but she is much, much better than Scarbrand as a coordinate character. Then we have the Sisters of Twilight. The Sisters of Twilight have the following advantages in their campaign. Like I would say, Durfo is just better to play. Their starting position is kind of annoying to deal with. Like, once you've played a couple of campaigns, you realize that, yeah, their starting position is not as great as you once realized. But they have a couple of advantages. One is that they make a third army viable, very viable, and very powerful for the Wood Elves, and that's the Hawk Rider army. The Hawk Riders, when you're playing the Sisters of Twilight, will get a cruise missile. That is incredibly powerful. And this cruise missile starts with one ability usage, and you can increase it to 2 for all armies. Furthermore, the Sisters of Twilight can also build pretty powerful items in their campaign through the Forge of Dave as well. And they're a walking artillery piece. I mean, walking artillery piece in the sense that how they handle units, not in the sense of siege, but they are flying artillery piece. They are incredibly powerful because they're the cruise missile faction Ledgering Lord. So incredibly powerful, very durable, flexible, quite flexible. Flying lords, or rather Legendary Lords that focus on flying units, don't necessarily do extremely well in a legendary campaign. Multiplayer is obviously its own thing, but like the Sisters of Twilight are pretty damn scary to actually have to face in battle because of their effects. Then we have at B tier, we start going into the ones that have limitations in their campaigns. I mean, Volcan already does, of course, but limitations, we have Kolek's on here. The only fun thing I would say about Kolek's campaign as a Warriors of Chaos, like, he is pretty powerful. He can get even more so with a lot of vassals. But what's fun about this campaign is the fact that you can vassalize Grimgor pretty early, far more quickly than the other Legendary Lords of the Warriors of Chaos, and then unleash Grimgor as a Green Tide. Like, you want to see Grimgor at its peak. It's not when you're allying him, it's not just letting him do his own thing in a campaign, it's actually vassalizing him, because you can give him a focus. Because when you vassalize him, you control who you declare war on, so Grimgor can have one specific target that he's going to take out, and then you can even take control of some of his armies to just annihilate factions and gain a vast amount of territory. And it is hilarious playing Kolek and having Grimgor as your vassal, and then Grimgor reaches faction strength rank 1 far above everyone else. Ends up being pretty damn ridiculous, all things considered. Then we have Drika, also a B tier Legendary Lord for the Wood Elves. With Drika, I would say that Drika's campaign suffers from a lot of issues in the long term. She doesn't start with the Oak of Ages. All the other Wood Elves hate her. She only has an easy time confederating Durfo. She's going to have to fight Orion at the very least in her campaign for the Oak, because she doesn't start with it. He does. She does start with one Ember. She does get Malevolent Treekin and Treeman in her campaign, giving her an insane amount of power. So insane that actually facing Drika in battle is an absolute nightmare in every campaign that starts near her. Like, I've made this point in video after video, is that when you're facing Drika, you don't want to face Drika directly. You run around, you take her out her unit recruitment, and then you hope attrition eventually takes its toll. But it is a fun campaign if you're playing in the short term, but for a long campaign, I would certainly not recommend it because of the limitations with Oak and diplomacy that she does have. It can work, don't get me wrong, it can absolutely work, and you can have really, really powerful armies because of the Malevolent Tregan, but still, fairly limited campaign. Then we have Festus. Festus is certainly C, I think, in terms of campaign enjoyment, campaign design. You will steamroll the Empire pretty hard in this campaign, but is that really fun, just having a campaign where you just wipe the floor with everyone else, right? Like, Volca at least may have a challenge to some extent. Bellacor can always seek a challenge in his campaign. But, like, I think with Festus, I think, like, certainly the Monogod Legendary Lords are not as great. Are certainly not as great as the Undivided Legendary Lords for the Warriors of Chaos, because while Festus gets the Plague and he gets the Nurgle units, and of course he does get the Undivided unit, having the flexibility of an Undivided Legendary Lord who gets access to all of the gods and all of their powers grants you a lot more power. For what it's worth, I do think like Nurgle is extremely powerful of the Monogods, though I think like Volca just ends up with a better campaign. She gets more powerful vassals. It's a lot more fun to deal with her campaign. She has better fights in that campaign. Festus is pretty strong, but not really all that interesting. Then we have Sig Vault. I'm going to put Sig Vault as a D tier. Honestly, I think like I could easily put him as F in terms of like player interest, because I think a lot of people don't play him. Though Sig Vault could be considered the higher ranked legendary lord than many others, because he's still an undivided legendary lord. One of the key, the assumptions people make is that he's Slaaneshi. He's not Slaaneshi. He's undivided. So he gets all the advantages of an undivided legendary lord. He gets hell cannons, all that kind of stuff very early on in his campaign. So that is a ridiculous amount of power that Sig Vault does have access to. He certainly is leaning towards Slaanesh, especially with his own army, but he still has a ridiculous amount of power because he is undivided. He isn't necessarily that interesting to play, however. I mean, powerful, sure, but if you're looking at Sig Vault's campaign, the smarter thing is to just end up conquering a lot of the Chaos Wastes and getting a lot of vassals there, and quite frankly, that's not necessarily all that interesting to deal with, but it is the smarter thing to do than just seeking a confrontation with 5+ powerful legendary lords that you would have to deal with in the West. Volca can do it, but Volca may not necessarily have to deal with Sig Vault as early as Sig Vault would have to deal with Volca. To be honest, he's just not as cool as Volca is. I mean, he's powerful. All of them are powerful. This is not the question of power, but like, if I'm going to play Warriors campaign, I'd certainly play Volca in that area than Sig Vault. Then we have Orion, absolutely an F tier legendary lord for the Wood Elves. It's kind of hilarious when you think about it, because on one hand, Orion, because of his faction effects, is flat out, and this is no joke, flat out the strongest legendary lord in the game, because he's playing a race, he's playing a faction that is built around having, income and having to spend money on troop upkeep. But what happens when you don't have to spend money? Because that's the thing about Orion. You declare so many wars on so many minor factions, irrelevant factions, that you'll literally end up having 20+ stacks, for none of which you're paying for in terms of turn upkeep. Rather, all you're doing is paying to recruit them. So you end up with a ridiculous sum of money, with a ridiculous number of armies, and you just steamroll the world. It's still a pretty awful campaign. The start isn't that great, and as you get steamrolling, it's not fun to have zero challenge in your campaign, and having such a level of power that, okay, it doesn't matter who you're up against. It can be an endgame crisis. You do bring 20, 30+ armies to an endgame crisis, you're going to auto-resolve that endgame crisis. And that's the issue in Orion's campaign. Like, what you literally do is you start with League Guard. That takes you a long time to get to Treekin, but once you get to Treekin, you just literally spam Treekin and as many heroes as you can and all that, and throw dozens and dozens of army against any problem, and you'll annihilate the map. Though not too quickly, because you don't want to do it too quickly, because you'll end up suffering significantly in terms of your economy. But yeah, it's just a really crappy campaign. I think that Creative Assembly hasn't known what to do with Orion to make him playable. Like, they gave him a significant benefit, and he's still pretty awful to play. Then we have Village, also F tier of the Warriors of Chaos. His starting position is of such a nature that it takes a long time to get to anywhere, and that's not a fun thing to experience to begin with. Then on top of that, Siege is genuinely, like, in terms of the gifts of chaos, Siege is the worst. The units are pretty solid, but the actual gifts of chaos you're going to get from Siege are not worth a damn, I would argue. So you do have that particular limitation, and the campaign itself just falls flat on its face. Like, yeah, powerful caster, powerful hybrid lord between caster and melee lord, actually. You do have a huge amount of barrier that is very easy to keep up. You basically can't be killed in a battle because of how his effects do work. But all the same, like, Siege the most limited, starting position not that great, ends up with an F tier Legendary Lord. Then we get Azazel. I would say that, like, Azazel is slightly better, like the Slashy. Yeah, the Slashy end up being the... and this time around, it is a dedicated Slashy Legendary Lord. So, with Azazel, he's, again, a powerful... Like, as I said, all of them are powerful Legendary Lords without exception, but how good is his campaign? Not so great. Vassalizing Kislev is not a fun experience, because Kislev is pretty bad at being a vassal. Like, some people have, like, Gremgor, or they get Cast Dwarves to vassalize. Other people get the Pathetic Empire. I mean, maybe I should rank Festus, though, to be fair, Festus does have much better faction effects, because Nurgle beats the crap out of Slaanesh. Slaanesh is not quite as bad as Siege. There are some good faction effects, or some good gifts of chaos, and some good units with Slaanesh, some decent ones, but it's not quite as good as Nurgle, though it's not as bad as Siege. But yeah, I would say, like, when we're looking at the Azazel's campaign, having to deal with Kislev is... Just the entire area of the campaign map is pretty awful to tackle. And then what? Oh, great, we're steamrolling the Empire again. You know, at least Festus has to deal with a dozen armies. Azazel just takes his sweet time and shows up with half a dozen vassals by the time an Empire just brutalizes all of it. Not really a fun campaign at all. And then the worst of the bunch, by far, maybe F- tier, is Archeon the Ever-Chosen. Very powerful Legendary Lord, really awful campaign to play. You're going to spend 30, 40 turns just traversing the Chaos Wastes, vassalizing and uniting the tribes of Chaos, getting Dark Fortress after Dark Fortress, and then swarming across the map. It is a powerful campaign without a shadow of a doubt, but it is also a horrible campaign to actually play, because you're literally, you may only have to fight one single battle, and that's possibly against Boris Ursus in your entire campaign, because by the time you encounter any kind of serious opposition, you've got dozens and dozens of armies to throw against that. You get major benefits for every vassal: diplomacy, research, souls benefits, so you'll get more gifts of chaos than anyone else. You'll get more allies than any of the others over here on this list, and you'll get so many Dark Fortresses, you'll be swimming in money. But it isn't a fun campaign to play. Like, it's kind of a silly situation, because Archeon should be an interesting campaign, a very interesting campaign, as you're trying to unite the forces of chaos to smash over the world. The problem is, because demons are so bad, and most of the factions you're dealing with are demonic factions, it doesn't end up being an interesting campaign. As I said, you will literally auto-resolve your entire campaign. Say what you will about the others, they might have at least some fights in their campaigns to deal with. Not necessarily that many. Like, you can auto-resolve the vast majority of battles in every single one of these campaigns. Maybe a couple early on. But Archeon is literally every single one of them. That is not a fun campaign by any stretch of imagination. And that's all there is to say. Costin here, signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, enable notifications, and stay tuned for more. That is with my Legendary Lord tier list. And we'll see what comes up next.